I went to pick up my daughter-in-law's car at the car wash. The owner, an old acquaintance, pulled me aside and whispered, "Ma'am, take your grandchildren and leave before nightfall." I asked, "Why?" "I found this in your daughter-in-law's car, and when I looked, my blood froze. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. My name is Ramona, and at 51, I thought I had seen everything life could throw at me. I was wrong, dead wrong. It was a Tuesday morning when my daughter-in-law Isla asked me to pick up her car from Miguel's car wash. Such a simple request. She was busy with the kids, she said, and David was at work. Could I just swing by and grab it for her? Of course I could. I'd do anything for my family, especially for my two precious grandsons, Tommy and Jake. Miguel's Shine and Clean had been in our neighborhood for over 20 years. Miguel himself was a good man, someone I'd known since David was in high school. His weathered hands told stories of honest work, and his kind eyes had always held a warmth that made you feel like family. But when I walked into his shop that morning, something was different. Miguel's usual cheerful greeting was replaced by a nervous fidget with his baseball cap. His eyes darted around like he was afraid someone might be listening. "Mrs. Ramona," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I need to talk to you, privately." The serious tone made my stomach clench. Miguel led me to the back of his shop, away from his employees and the other customers. His weathered face was creased with worry lines I'd never noticed before. "What's wrong, Miguel?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He glanced around once more before reaching into his work shirt pocket. "I found something in your daughter-in-law's car. Something that... Well, it ain't right, Mrs. Ramona. It ain't right at all." My heart started beating faster. "What kind of something?" Miguel pulled out a small plastic bag containing what looked like a prescription bottle, but as I squinted at it, I could see there was more inside the bag. Much more. "I was cleaning out the glove compartment like she asked," Miguel explained, his voice shaking slightly. "You know how thorough we are here. We clean everything, inside and out. That's when I found these." He opened the bag carefully, like he was handling something dangerous. The first thing he pulled out was a prescription bottle with Isla's name on it. The label read, "Clonazepam. Take as needed for anxiety." But what made my blood run cold wasn't the medication itself, it was the date. The prescription had been filled just 3 days ago, but the bottle was nearly empty. "That's not the worst part," Miguel said, his hands trembling as he reached back into the bag. What he showed me next made my knees go weak. Photographs. Multiple photographs of my grandsons sleeping in their beds. Not the kind of sweet pictures a mother might take. These were different. Clinical. Disturbing. Tommy, age 7, sprawled across his Batman sheets in an unnatural position, his little mouth hanging open. Jake, only 5, curled up in his toddler bed, but something about his posture looked wrong. Too limp. Too still. "There's more," Miguel whispered, pulling out a folded piece of paper. I unfolded it with shaking hands. It was a handwritten schedule, detailed down to the minute. Tommy's bedtime routine, what time he usually woke up, when he took his afternoon nap on weekends. Jake's schedule was even more detailed, including bathroom breaks and snack times. At the bottom, written in Isla's neat handwriting, were notes that made my stomach turn. Tommy, half tablet, works in 20 minutes. Jake, quarter tablet, out for 3 hours minimum. The paper slipped from my fingers and fluttered to the greasy floor of Miguel's shop. "Mrs. Ramona," Miguel said gently. "I think she's been drugging those babies." The words hit me like a physical blow. I gripped the edge of Miguel's workbench to keep from falling. My grandsons, my precious boys, the thought of someone giving them medication they didn't need, making them unnaturally drowsy, vulnerable. "Are you sure?" I managed to ask, though deep down I already knew the answer. Miguel nodded grimly. "I got 4 grandkids of my own, Mrs. Ramona. I know what normal sleeping looks like, and I know what ain't normal. These pictures." He shook his head. "These kids look drugged." I thought about the last few times I'd seen Tommy and Jake, how unusually quiet they'd been during recent family dinners, how they'd seemed more tired than usual, falling asleep in their chairs before 8 o'clock. Isla had laughed it off, saying they'd been extra active during the day, wearing themselves out. I'd believed her. Why wouldn't I? There's something else, Miguel said reluctantly. He reached into the bag one more time and pulled out a small notebook. This was tucked behind the pictures. I opened it with trembling fingers, page after page of Isla's handwriting, dosage notes, times, effects. She was keeping a log like some kind of sick experiment. Tommy more resistant, needed 3/4 tablet. Jake slept 12 hours straight. Perfect for shopping trip with Mom. The notebook fell from my hands and joined the schedule on the floor. I felt sick, physically ill. This wasn't just medication misuse. This was systematic abuse of my grandsons, and it had been going on for months based on the dates in that horrible notebook. What do? I whispered, more to myself than to Miguel. You get them babies out of there, Miguel said firmly. Tonight, before she knows you found this stuff. I looked at this man who had just handed me the most devastating information of my life. Why are you telling me this? You could have just ignored it, minded your own business. Miguel's weathered face hardened with determination. Because somebody's got to protect those kids. And if their own mama ain't gonna do it, then their grandma better step up. I nodded, trying to pull myself together. I had to think clearly. I had to be smart about this. One wrong move and Isla might disappear with my grandsons forever. Or worse, she might increase whatever she was giving them. Miguel, I said, my voice stronger now, I need you to keep this evidence safe. Can you do that? Already done, he replied. I made copies of everything before I showed you, hidden them in my safe at home. I felt a surge of gratitude toward this man who had risked his own safety to protect my family. Thank you. You may have just saved their lives. As I drove away from Miguel's shop, my hands were still shaking on the steering wheel. I had Isla's car, but I also had something much more valuable. I had the truth. The question now was what to do with it. I couldn't go to David, not yet. He was so completely under Isla's spell that he'd never believe me without overwhelming proof. And I couldn't go to the police without more evidence. What I needed was time to observe, to document, to build a case that no one could ignore. But most importantly, I needed to protect Tommy and Jake, whatever it took. The drive home felt like the longest 20 minutes of my life. Every red light was torture. Every minute that passed was another minute my grandsons were in danger. By the time I pulled into my driveway, I had made a decision. I was going to get my boys out of that house, tonight. The next few days were the hardest of my life. I had to act normal, smile when Isla called, pretend everything was fine when I saw my grandsons. But every interaction felt like I was looking through a dark lens, seeing things I'd somehow missed before. Thursday evening, David invited me over for dinner. The boys have been asking for Grandma, he said over the phone, his voice warm with affection. If only he knew what I knew. I arrived at their house at 6 o'clock sharp, bringing homemade cookies like I always did. Tommy and Jake rushed to greet me at the door, their little faces lighting up with joy. But now I was looking for signs, and what I saw made my heart break. Tommy, normally my energetic little tornado, seemed sluggish. His usual chatter was reduced to quiet mumbles, and his eyes had a glassy quality that I'd attributed to tiredness before. Jake was clinging to my leg, but his grip felt weak, almost like he was having trouble staying upright. They've been extra sleepy today, Isla explained with that bright smile I was beginning to hate. Growing boys need their rest, right? I forced myself to smile back. Of course. They're probably going through growth spurts. During dinner, I watched Isla like a hawk. When she got up to get the boys their drinks, I noticed she made separate trips to the kitchen for each child. Tommy got apple juice in his favorite blue cup. Jake got chocolate milk in his dinosaur cup. Both drinks came from containers I hadn't seen her open. Drink up, sweetie, Isla cooed to Tommy, ruffling his hair. You know how much you love apple juice. Tommy dutifully drank about half the cup before pushing it away. I'm full, Mama. Just a little more, Isla insisted, her voice taking on an edge I'd never heard before. Mama knows what's best. I wanted to snatch that cup away from him. Instead, I distracted him with questions about school, hoping he'd forget about the drink. It worked for Jake, too. who was more interested in telling me about his new toy dinosaur than finishing his chocolate milk. After dinner, David and I were cleaning up in the kitchen while Isla took the boys upstairs for their bath. That's when I noticed something that made my stomach drop. In the sink were two small cups, different from the ones the boys had used at dinner. These cups had a white, chalky residue at the bottom. "David," I said carefully, "what are these cups from?" He glanced over while loading the dishwasher. "Oh, those are from the boys' vitamins. Isla's been giving them these new supplements. She crushes them up and mixes them with a little juice so they're easier to swallow." Vitamins. My heart was racing, but I kept my voice casual. "That's smart of her. What kind of vitamins?" "Some kind of natural sleep aid," David said, completely oblivious to my alarm. "The boys have been having trouble sleeping lately, so Isla found these herbal supplements online. She says they help kids relax and get better rest." I gripped the edge of the sink so hard my knuckles went white. "Sleep aids? For children that young?" David shrugged. "Isla did a lot of research. She showed me all these articles about how important sleep is for developing brains. And it's natural stuff, not real medicine. Real medicine. Like the very real, very powerful anxiety medication I'd seen in that prescription bottle. The medication that wasn't supposed to be given to children, especially not children as young as mine grandsons. Has their doctor recommended these supplements?" I asked, trying to keep the accusation out of my voice. "Well, no, but Isla says lots of parents use them. She's really good at researching this kind of stuff online." 20 minutes later, both boys were fast asleep. Not the natural, peaceful sleep of tired children, but the deep, unnaturally still sleep I'd seen in those horrifying photographs. Tommy was sprawled across his bed in the exact same position I'd seen in the pictures. Jake was curled up in his toddler bed, breathing so slowly I had to put my hand near his mouth to make sure he was still breathing. It took everything in me not to scream. "They're such good sleepers now," Isla said with satisfaction, standing in the doorway of Jake's room. "Remember how much trouble we used to have getting them to bed? Now they go right to sleep and stay asleep all night." I remembered. I remembered how Tommy used to fight bedtime, how he'd pop out of his room 3 or 4 times asking for water or one more story. I remembered how Jake used to wake up from nightmares and crawl into his parents' bed. Normal childhood behaviors that apparently Isla found inconvenient enough to medicate away. "The house is so peaceful now," Isla continued, her voice dreamy. "I can actually relax in the evenings, catch up on my shows, read a book. It's been life-changing. Life-changing." She was drugging my grandsons for her own convenience. That weekend, I volunteered to babysit while David and Isla went out for their anniversary dinner. It was the perfect opportunity to observe the boys without Isla's interference. Tommy and Jake were thrilled to have a sleepover at Grandma's house. I'd told David I wanted to make it special for them, cook their favorite foods, let them stay up a little late watching movies. What I really wanted was to see how they behaved without whatever Isla had been giving them. The difference was remarkable and heartbreaking. Without their vitamins, both boys were completely different children. Tommy's natural energy returned with a vengeance. He was bouncing off the walls, chattering nonstop, full of the mischief and curiosity that made him uniquely Tommy. Jake was giggly and playful, building elaborate towers with blocks just to knock them down, his infectious laughter filling my house. This was how they were supposed to be. This was who they really were when they weren't being chemically subdued. But it also confirmed my worst fears. The contrast was so dramatic that there was no denying what Isla had been doing to them. She wasn't just giving them mild sleep aids. She was systematically drugging them with powerful medication that was altering their personalities, their natural development, their very selves. I documented everything that weekend. I took videos of the boys playing, laughing, being normal children. I wrote down everything they told me, including some disturbing details that emerged during our conversations. "Grandma," Tommy said while we were making pancakes Sunday morning, "sometimes I feel really weird after dinner at home." "Weird how, sweetheart?" "Like everything is far away, and I can't remember things sometimes. Mama says it's because I'm getting bigger, but it feels scary." Jake, who was sitting on the counter helping measure flour, nodded solemnly. I don't like the sleepy juice, Grandma. It makes my tummy hurt. What sleepy juice, honey? The medicine Mama puts in our cups. She says it helps us sleep good, but I don't want to sleep all the time. I want to play. My hands were shaking as I flipped the pancakes. These innocent little boys had been trying to tell someone what was happening to them, but no one had listened. No one had understood. That night, after I'd returned the boys to their parents, I sat in my living room and made a plan. I couldn't go to David yet. He was too completely under Isla's influence, and she was too good at manipulating him. I needed more evidence, and I needed professional help. Monday morning, I called my doctor and made an appointment. I needed to understand exactly what those medications could do to children, what the long-term effects might be. I also needed to know what legal options I had. Dr. Martinez had been my physician for 15 years. When I showed him the photos of the prescription bottle and described what I'd observed, his face went pale. Ramona, he said gravely, what you're describing is very serious. Clonazepam is a powerful benzodiazepine. It's not meant for children, and certainly not at the frequency you're suggesting. What could it do to them? In children, especially long-term use, it could affect their cognitive development, their memory, their natural sleep patterns. It could cause dependency, and if she's mixing it with other substances. He shook his head. This needs to be reported immediately. I need more proof first, I said. Something that can't be explained away or dismissed. Dr. Martinez leaned forward, his expression serious. Ramona, you need to understand something. If this has been going on for months like you suspect, those children may already be experiencing withdrawal symptoms when they don't get the medication. That's why they seem more energetic and different when they're with you. They're actually getting better. The confirmation hit me like a physical blow. My grandsons were going through withdrawal from medication their own mother had been secretly giving them. What do? I whispered. You get them somewhere safe, he said firmly. And then you call Child Protective Services. As I drove home from Dr. Martinez's office, I felt the weight of what lay ahead. I was about to tear my family apart to save it. I was about to accuse my daughter-in-law of systematically abusing my grandsons. I was about to break my son's heart. But I was also about to save 2 little boys who couldn't save themselves. The question was no longer whether I would act. The question was how soon I could get Tommy and Jake away from their mother before she realized I knew the truth. The call came at 7:30 on a Wednesday morning. I was sitting at my kitchen table, nursing my second cup of coffee and trying to figure out how to get my grandsons away from Isla without alerting her to what I knew. The phone rang, and David's name appeared on the screen. Mom, he said, and I could hear the exhaustion in his voice. I hate to ask this, but could you possibly take the boys for a few days? Maybe even a week? My heart nearly stopped. What's wrong? Isla's mother fell and broke her hip. We need to drive down to Phoenix to help get her settled in a rehabilitation facility. Isla's really upset, and the boys would just be in the way at the hospital. I closed my eyes and sent up a silent prayer of gratitude. Sometimes the universe gives you exactly what you need when you need it most. Of course, I said, trying to keep the relief out of my voice. I'd love to have them. When do you need me to pick them up? Actually, would it be okay if we dropped them off this afternoon? We want to leave first thing tomorrow morning. Absolutely. I'll get their room ready. After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen for a full 5 minutes, just breathing. This was it. This was my chance. A legitimate reason to have Tommy and Jake with me for an extended period. Time to document their recovery. Time to build an unshakable case. But it also meant I had to be incredibly careful. If Isla suspected anything, if she realized I knew what she'd been doing, she might find a way to take the boys and disappear. I'd seen enough crime shows to know that desperate people do desperate things. I spent the rest of the morning preparing. I called Dr. Martinez and asked if he could see the boys as soon as possible, explaining that I had a narrow window to document their condition. He agreed to squeeze them in for an emergency appointment Friday morning. I also called my neighbor, Mrs. Chen, who had been a teacher for 30 years before retiring. She was one of the few people I trusted completely, and I needed a witness to what I was going to observe. Margaret, I said when she answered, I need your help with something very serious. 20 minutes later, she was sitting in my living room, her face growing paler as I explained what I'd discovered. "Those poor babies," she whispered, shaking her head. "Ramona, you're doing the right thing. Whatever you need, I'm here." At 4 o'clock that afternoon, David and Isla arrived with the boys. I watched Isla carefully as she handed me their overnight bags, looking for any sign that she suspected something, but she seemed genuinely distracted by her mother's situation. "I packed their vitamins," she said, pulling a small bottle out of one of the bags. "Tommy gets 2 before bedtime. Jake gets 1. They're really important for their sleep routine." I took the bottle, my skin crawling as I realized I was holding the very medication she'd been using to drug them. "Of course, I'll make sure they take them." "And Ramona," Isla said, her hand on my arm. "If they seem extra energetic or have trouble sleeping, just give them an extra vitamin. Sometimes the change in environment affects them." "I understand," I said, fighting every instinct to pull away from her touch. After David and Isla left, I took the boys inside and immediately hid the vitamin bottle in my bedroom. Then I sat down with Tommy and Jake on my couch and had the hardest conversation of my life. "Boys," I said gently, "Grandma needs to tell you something important. Those vitamins that Mama gives you? We're not going to take them while you're here." Tommy looked confused. "But Mama says we have to." "I know, sweetheart, but sometimes grown-ups make mistakes, even mamas. Those vitamins aren't good for you." Jake's eyes went wide. "Are we in trouble?" "No, honey, you're not in trouble. You've never been in trouble. Grandma just wants to make sure you feel better." I spent the next hour explaining, in age-appropriate terms, that the medicine had been making them sleepy and confused, and that they might feel different over the next few days as it left their systems. I told them they might have trouble sleeping at first, or feel more energetic than usual, and that was completely normal. "Will it hurt?" Tommy asked, his 7-year-old mind trying to process what I was telling him. "You might feel a little uncomfortable sometimes," I said honestly. "But Grandma will be here the whole time, and it's going to get better every day." The first night was rough. Both boys had difficulty falling asleep, tossing and turning in their beds. Tommy woke up twice from nightmares, something that apparently hadn't happened in months. But instead of being alarmed, I was encouraged. These were normal childhood sleep patterns returning. By Thursday evening, the change was remarkable. Tommy was back to his old self, full of questions and boundless energy. Jake was laughing again, really laughing, not the subdued giggles I'd become accustomed to. They played for hours, built elaborate fort cities with couch cushions, and demanded story after story at bedtime. I documented everything: photos, videos, detailed notes about their behavior, their energy levels, their natural sleep patterns. Mrs. Chen came over both days and took her own notes, providing independent verification of what we were witnessing. "It's like watching flowers bloom," she said Thursday evening, watching Jake chase Tommy around my backyard with a water gun. "Those boys are coming back to life." Friday morning, I took them to Dr. Martinez. He examined both boys thoroughly, taking careful notes about their energy levels, their reflexes, their cognitive responses. He also drew blood samples to check for any remaining medication in their systems. "Mrs. Patterson," he said to me privately while the boys played in his waiting room, "what you've documented here is compelling evidence of systematic medication abuse. These children show classic signs of recovering from benzodiazepine dependency. Will there be any permanent damage? At their ages, and if the abuse stops now, they should recover completely. Children are remarkably resilient, but if it had continued..." He shook his head. "You may have saved their lives." That afternoon, I made the call I'd been dreading. I contacted Child Protective Services. The caseworker who came to my house was a young woman named Sarah Collins. She was thorough, professional, and clearly experienced in these types of situations. I showed her everything: the evidence Miguel had found, my documentation of the boys' recovery, Dr. Martinez's medical notes, the photographs and videos I'd taken. "This is substantial evidence," she said, reviewing my file. "We'll need to move quickly. When are the parents expected back?" Sunday evening. That gives us time to get the proper paperwork in place. Mrs. Patterson, I want you to understand that once we start this process, there's no going back. This will likely tear your family apart, at least temporarily. I looked through my living room window at Tommy and Jake, who were building a sandbox castle in my backyard. Tommy was explaining some elaborate engineering concept to his little brother, his face animated with enthusiasm. Jake was hanging on every word, asking questions and offering suggestions. They looked healthy, happy, normal. They're worth it, I said firmly. They're worth everything. Sarah nodded. We'll need to place them in protective custody while we investigate. Given the circumstances and your relationship to the children, we'd prefer to place them with you if you're willing to accept temporary guardianship. Yes, I said immediately. Absolutely yes. There will be a hearing. The parents will be notified. It's going to get very ugly, Mrs. Patterson. I thought about David, about how devastated he would be, about how Isla would fight back, probably claiming I was a vindictive old woman trying to steal her children, about how our family might never recover from this. I understand, I said, but those boys can't protect themselves. Someone has to. That evening I got a call from David. They were planning to drive back Saturday instead of Sunday because Isla was anxious to get home to the boys. My blood ran cold. Is everything okay there? Mom's doing better than expected. Isla's just, you know how she gets when she's away from the boys too long. She misses them. She missed controlling them, I thought. She missed having them drugged and compliant. Maybe you should stay the extra day, I suggested. Let her spend more time with her mother. I suggested that, but Isla's insisting. We'll probably be home by Saturday evening. I had less than 24 hours before they returned. Less than 24 hours before my world exploded. After I hung up, I called Sarah Collins and gave her the update. She assured me that the emergency custody order would be in place by Saturday afternoon, but timing would be critical. I spent Friday night lying awake, staring at the ceiling, and listening to the sound of my grandson sleeping peacefully in the next room. Natural, healthy sleep without any artificial aids. Tomorrow, their lives would change forever, but at least they would be safe. At 6 a.m, I made myself coffee and sat at my kitchen table, watching the sunrise through my window. In a few hours, Child Protective Services would arrive. David and Isla would come home to find their children gone and their world shattered. I thought about all the ways this could go wrong. What if David refused to believe the evidence? What if Isla convinced him I was lying? What if they fought the custody order and somehow won? But then I heard Tommy's voice from upstairs, chattering excitedly to Jake about the dream he'd had. A normal, vibrant, healthy child's voice. That's when I knew I was doing the right thing. Whatever happened next, whatever the cost to my relationship with David, whatever damage this did to our family, it would be worth it. Tommy and Jake would be safe. And sometimes, that's all that matters. Saturday afternoon arrived like a storm I could see coming but couldn't avoid. At 2 o'clock, Sarah Collins pulled into my driveway with another caseworker and a police officer. The boys were in my backyard, completely oblivious to what was about to happen. I had spent the morning trying to prepare them without terrifying them. Tommy, Jake, I called from the back door. Can you come inside for a minute? There are some people here who need to talk to us. Both boys came running, their faces flushed from playing in the sunshine. They looked so healthy, so alive, so completely different from the lethargic children they'd been just a week ago. Sarah knelt down to their level, her voice gentle but professional. Hi, boys. I'm Sarah, and I work for an organization that makes sure children are safe and happy. I need to talk to you and your grandmother about some important things. Tommy, always the protective older brother, stepped slightly in front of Jake. Are we in trouble? No, sweetheart, Sarah said. You're not in trouble. We just need to ask some questions. What followed was the most heartbreaking hour of my life. Sarah interviewed the boys separately, asking them about their sleep patterns, their vitamins, how they felt when they took them versus when they didn't. Both children, in their innocent, truthful way, confirmed everything I had documented. The sleepy medicine makes my head feel fuzzy, Jake told Sarah. his 5-year-old vocabulary struggling to express something no child should have to describe. And sometimes I can't remember things. Like yesterday feels far away. Tommy was more articulate, but equally devastating. Mama said the vitamins would help me sleep better, but they made me feel weird, like I was watching everything happen to someone else. I didn't like them, but Mama said I had to take them. By 4 o'clock, the paperwork was complete. The boys were officially in my temporary custody, and there was an emergency restraining order preventing Isla from being alone with them pending a full investigation. David's going to be here soon, I told Sarah, my hands shaking as I watched her organize the legal documents. How do I even begin to explain this? Mrs. Patterson, she said kindly, your son is going to be angry. He's going to feel betrayed, confused, and defensive. That's normal. But remember, you're not the enemy here. You're protecting his children. At 6:15, I heard David's car in the driveway. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst. The boys were upstairs in their room, and I had asked Sarah and her team to wait in my kitchen, out of immediate sight but close enough to intervene if necessary. David's key turned in my front door lock, a sound that had always brought me joy. Today, it felt like a death knell. "Mom," he called out. "We're back. Where are my boys?" I met him in the living room. Isla was right behind him, her eyes scanning the room with the sharp awareness of a predator sensing danger. "David," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "We need to talk." "Where are Tommy and Jake?" Isla demanded, pushing past David. "I want to see my sons right now." "They're upstairs," I said. "But before you see them, there's something you both need to know." That's when David noticed the official documents on my coffee table. His face went pale as he picked up the top sheet, his eyes scanning the legal terminology. "What the hell is this?" he whispered. "Emergency custody order? Mom, what's going on?" I took a deep breath. This was it. The moment that would either save my grandsons or destroy my relationship with my son forever. "David, I found evidence that Isla has been drugging the boys, systematically, for months." The silence that followed was deafening. David's face went through a series of expressions: confusion, disbelief, then anger. "That's ridiculous," he said, his voice rising. "That's absolutely ridiculous. Mom, what's gotten into you?" Isla stepped forward, her face a perfect mask of wounded innocence. "Ramona, how could you even think such a thing? Those are vitamins, natural supplements to help them sleep better." "Clonazepam isn't a vitamin, Isla," I said quietly. "It's a powerful anti-anxiety medication that should never be given to children." The mask slipped for just a second. I saw something flicker in Isla's eyes. Surprise, fear, calculation. Then it was back in place. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. David was staring at me like I'd grown a second head. "Mom, this is insane. You're talking about my wife, the mother of my children. Do you hear yourself?" That's when Sarah Collins stepped into the room, followed by the other caseworker and the police officer. David's face went from pale to ashen. "Mr. Patterson," Sarah said professionally. "I'm Sarah Collins with Child Protective Services. We've been investigating allegations of medication abuse regarding your children." "This is a mistake," David said, his voice cracking. "A huge mistake. My wife would never hurt our kids." Sarah opened her file and began showing David the evidence. The prescription bottle found in Isla's car, the photographs of the boys in their unnaturally deep sleep, the detailed log Isla had kept of dosages and effects, Dr. Martinez's medical evaluation, the boys' own statements. With each piece of evidence, I watched my son's world crumble. His hands shook as he looked at the photos of his sons, drugged and vulnerable. His breathing became labored as he read Isla's medication log in her own handwriting. "This can't be real," he kept saying. "This can't be real." But Isla wasn't going down without a fight. When she realized the evidence was overwhelming, she switched tactics. "Fine," she said, her voice suddenly sharp and cold. "Maybe I did give them something to help them sleep. Do you have any idea what it's like dealing with hyperactive children 24 hours a day? David's never home. I had no help. I was exhausted." David's head snapped up. "You're admitting it? You actually drugged our children? I gave them something natural to help them relax, Isla said defensively. Other mothers do it all the time. You're all acting like I'm some kind of monster. Natural? I couldn't keep quiet anymore. Clonazepam is a prescription medication? Where did you even get it? Isla's composure finally cracked completely. From my own prescription, okay? I have anxiety, I needed help, and yes, sometimes I shared it with the boys when they were being impossible. It's not like I was trying to hurt them. The room erupted. David started shouting, demanding to know how long this had been going on. The police officer stepped forward, explaining that Isla was under arrest for child endangerment. Sarah was trying to maintain order while protecting the integrity of the investigation. And through it all, I could hear Tommy's voice from upstairs. "Grandma? What's all the noise?" "Stay upstairs, sweetheart," I called back, my heart breaking for all the trauma these innocent children had already endured. David turned to me, his eyes filled with a pain I'd never seen before. "Did you know?" he asked. "How long have you known?" "I found out a week ago," I said, "when Miguel found the evidence in her car." "A week?" David's voice rose to a shout. "You've known for a week and you didn't tell me?" "I had to be sure," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "I had to protect the boys first." "Protect them? You stole them. You took my children away from me based on. He gestured helplessly at the evidence spread across my coffee table. The evidence he couldn't deny no matter how much he wanted to. "Based on the fact that your wife was poisoning them," I said firmly. "David, look at those photos. Really look at them. When was the last time you saw Tommy and Jake that alert and energetic?" David picked up one of the photos Dr. Martinez had taken during the boys' examination, showing them bright-eyed and laughing. Then he looked at one of the pictures found in Isla's car, showing Tommy unconscious in an unnatural position. The comparison was devastating. "Oh, God," he whispered, sinking into my couch. "Oh, God, what has she done to my boys?" Isla was led away in handcuffs, still protesting her innocence, still claiming she was just trying to be a good mother. As the police car pulled out of my driveway, David and I were left alone with Sarah Collins and the wreckage of our family. "Mr. Patterson," Sarah said gently, "your children are going to need a lot of support during this transition. They're already showing remarkable improvement under your mother's care." David looked up at me, his eyes red with tears I'd never seen him shed. "Can I see them?" I nodded, my own tears finally spilling over. "They're in their room, but David, they've been through a lot. They're confused and scared." David climbed the stairs like an old man, each step weighted with the knowledge of what had been done to his children. I followed behind, my heart breaking for all of us. Tommy and Jake were sitting on their beds, clutching their favorite stuffed animals. They looked up when David entered, their faces uncertain. "Daddy," Tommy said in a small voice, "is Mama coming back?" David knelt down between their beds, gathering both boys into his arms. "I don't know, buddy," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "But I promise you, I'm going to make sure you're safe. Both of you." "Are we going to stay with Grandma?" Jake asked. David looked at me over their heads, his expression a mixture of gratitude and devastation. "For now, yes. Grandma's going to take really good care of you." That night, after the caseworkers had left and the boys were finally asleep, David and I sat in my kitchen, drinking coffee and trying to process what had happened. "I should have known," he said, staring into his cup. "I should have seen the signs." "She was very good at hiding it," I said, "and you trusted her. You're supposed to be able to trust your wife. How did I miss it? How did I not notice that my own children were being drugged?" I reached across the table and took his hand. "Because you're a good man who assumes other people are good too. That's not a flaw, David. That's what makes you a loving father." David squeezed my hand, tears streaming down his face. "I'm so sorry, Mom. I'm sorry I didn't believe you. I'm sorry I let this happen to them." "You didn't let anything happen," I said firmly. "You were deceived by someone you trusted completely. The important thing now is that Tommy and Jake are safe." David nodded, wiping his eyes. "What happens next?" I thought about the legal battles ahead, the custody hearings, the long process of healing that awaited all of us. We take it one day at a time, I said, and we make sure those boys know they're loved. Upstairs, I could hear Tommy talking quietly to Jake, probably trying to comfort his little brother the way he always did. Two resilient children who had survived something no child should ever have to endure. They were safe now. Whatever came next, they were safe. The weeks that followed Isla's arrest were a whirlwind of court hearings, psychological evaluations, and painful discoveries. Each day seemed to reveal another layer of deception that had been poisoning my family for years. David moved into my spare bedroom, unable to bear living in the house where his children had been systematically drugged. He'd taken a leave of absence from work, dedicating himself entirely to understanding what had happened and helping Tommy and Jake heal. I keep thinking about all the signs I missed, he said one evening as we watched the boys play in my backyard. They were building another elaborate fort, their laughter carrying through the open windows. Remember last Christmas when Tommy fell asleep at the dinner table? I remembered. Isla had laughed it off, saying he'd been up early with excitement. We'd all thought it was adorable, the way his little head had drooped forward into his mashed potatoes. She told me he'd been having nightmares, David continued, his voice hollow. Said the sleep aids were helping him rest better. I actually thanked her for being such an attentive mother. The psychological evaluation report had arrived that morning, and it painted a horrifying picture. Dr. Rebecca Walsh, a specialist in childhood trauma, had spent hours with both boys. Her findings were devastating. Both children show signs of having been systematically medicated over an extended period, she had written. Tommy exhibits classic symptoms of benzodiazepine dependency, including memory gaps, confusion about time sequences, and anxiety when discussing his mother. Jake shows similar symptoms but appears to have been medicated more recently, possibly within the last 6 months. 6 months? Jake had only turned 5 8 months ago. Isla had been drugging him since he was barely 4 years old. But the most damning evidence came from an unexpected source. During the investigation, police had searched David and Isla's house. In Isla's home office, hidden behind false backs in her filing cabinet, they found detailed journals dating back 3 years. Sarah Collins brought them to me on a rainy Thursday afternoon, her face grim as she set the box of notebooks on my kitchen table. "Mrs. Patterson," she said carefully, "these journals document everything. I need to warn you, some of the content is very disturbing." I opened the first notebook with trembling hands. Isla's neat handwriting filled page after page, but these weren't the ramblings of a confused mother. These were the calculated observations of someone conducting a deliberate experiment. Day 1, the first entry read, "Tommy had another tantrum today about bedtime. David thinks I'm too lenient, but he doesn't understand how exhausting it is to deal with an energetic child all day. I've been researching natural sleep aids online, found some interesting information about herbs that can calm hyperactive children." I flipped through the pages, watching the entries evolve from complaints about normal childhood behavior to detailed medication logs. By page 20, Isla was documenting dosages, timing, and effects with scientific precision. Gave Tommy half a crushed tablet mixed with apple juice at dinner. Effect noticeable within 30 minutes. Deep sleep for 10 hours straight. Woke up groggy but compliant. This could be very useful for managing his behavior. The entries became more frequent and more disturbing. Isla had been systematically increasing dosages, experimenting with different delivery methods, even noting which activities were easier to accomplish when the boys were medicated. Shopping trip today much more pleasant with both boys on their supplements. Tommy didn't ask for anything in the toy store. Jake didn't complain about walking. Other mothers complimented me on how well-behaved my children are. If only they knew the secret. I felt sick reading her words. This wasn't postpartum depression or maternal anxiety. This was calculated abuse disguised as parenting. David found me reading the journals an hour later, tears streaming down my face. He took one look at the open notebook and sank into the chair beside me. "How bad is it?" he asked. "It's worse than we thought," I said, sliding the notebook toward him. "David, she was proud of what she was doing. She thought she was being clever. As David read, his face went through the same progression of emotions I'd experienced: disbelief, horror, rage, and finally, a bone-deep sadness that seemed to age him 10 years in 10 minutes. 3 years, he whispered. She's been doing this for 3 years. Not to Jake, I said, trying to find some small comfort. According to her notes, she only started giving him medication 6 months ago. David's jaw clenched. When I started working longer hours, when I got the promotion and began traveling more. The pattern was clear now. Isla hadn't been a struggling mother overwhelmed by the demands of parenting. She'd been a woman who found children inconvenient and had decided to chemically modify them to fit her lifestyle. Listen to this, David said, his voice shaking as he read from a more recent entry. David's mother has been asking to spend more time with the boys. I've been putting her off because they're less manageable without their supplements, and I don't want her to notice anything unusual. Old women are always so suspicious about medication. Old women. As if my concern for my grandson's well-being was some kind of character flaw, the journals revealed something else that made my blood run cold. Isla had been researching other medications, stronger ones. Her most recent entries talked about graduated dosages for different age groups and long-term management strategies. She hadn't been planning to stop. If anything, she'd been planning to escalate. That evening, after the boys were in bed, David and I sat in my living room with Dr. Walsh, who had come to discuss her preliminary findings. I want you both to understand something, she said, her voice gentle but firm. What these children experienced wasn't just medical abuse. It was a form of psychological control that could have had permanent consequences. What kind of consequences? David asked, though I could tell he was afraid of the answer. Benzodiazepines affect developing brain chemistry, Dr. Walsh explained. Long-term use in children can impact memory formation, emotional regulation, and cognitive development. But the psychological impact may be even more significant. She pulled out her tablet and showed us brain scans she'd taken of both boys. These are Tommy's scans from last week, compared to typical scans for a 7-year-old. You can see areas of decreased activity in regions associated with memory and emotional processing. The colorful images looked like abstract art to me, but the implications were terrifying. Will it be permanent? I asked. Children's brains are remarkably plastic, Dr. Walsh said. With proper care and therapy, most of the effects should reverse. But Tommy and Jake will need ongoing support to process what happened to them. Over the next few days, more disturbing details emerged. Isla's internet search history revealed extensive research into child medication, sleep disorders, and managing difficult children. She'd been active in online forums where mothers discussed using prescription medication to control their children's behavior. Most shocking of all, investigators found evidence that Isla had been in contact with her own mother about the medication. Text messages between them showed that Isla's mother had not only known about the drugging, but had encouraged it. Some children just need extra help settling down, one message read. I used to give you and your sister cough syrup with codeine when you were little and acting up. It's not abuse, it's good parenting. The generational pattern of child abuse was staggering. Isla had been raised by a mother who saw medication as a parenting tool, and she'd simply taken it to the next level with her own children. The court hearing was scheduled for the following Monday. Isla's lawyer was pushing for a plea deal, arguing that she'd been suffering from postpartum depression and anxiety that had clouded her judgment. But the evidence was overwhelming, and the prosecution wasn't interested in bargains. Mrs. Patterson, the district attorney Jennifer Moore explained during our meeting, your daughter-in-law kept detailed records of systematic child abuse spanning 3 years. This isn't a case of poor judgment or mental illness. This is deliberate criminal behavior. The night before the hearing, I found David sitting on my back porch, staring up at the stars. The boys were asleep upstairs, their breathing finally natural and peaceful after weeks of recovery. I keep thinking about our wedding day, he said without looking at me. Isla was so beautiful, so perfect. Everyone said I was lucky to find someone like her. You couldn't have known, I said, settling into the chair beside him. But I should have, he insisted. I'm their father. I should have protected them. David, look at me. I waited until he met my eyes. You did protect them. When you found out the truth, you immediately chose them over her. That's what a good father does. He was quiet for a long moment. What if I'd never found out? What if you hadn't discovered the evidence? How long would this have gone on? I thought about Isla's journals, about her research into stronger medications, about her plans for long-term management. I thought about Tommy and Jake, growing up in a fog of chemical compliance, their natural personalities suppressed and controlled. It doesn't matter, I said firmly, because we did find out. Because you chose to believe the evidence over your loyalty to her. Because those boys are safe now. David nodded slowly. They're going to ask me tomorrow if I want to make a victim impact statement. What will you say? That she didn't just drug my children, he said, his voice steady now. She stole 3 years of their childhood. She stole their trust, their sense of safety, their right to be normal kids, and she almost stole their future. As we sat there in the darkness, I felt a strange sense of closure. The worst was behind us now. Tomorrow, Isla would face the consequences of her actions. But tonight, Tommy and Jake were sleeping peacefully upstairs, their bodies finally free of the chemicals that had controlled them for so long. The healing could finally begin. 6 months later, I stood in my kitchen making pancakes for 3 hungry people. Tommy was at the table helping Jake with a jigsaw puzzle, their heads bent together in concentration. David was reading the newspaper, occasionally looking up to smile at his sons. It was a scene so normal, so peaceful, that sometimes I had to remind myself how close we'd come to losing it forever. The court proceedings had concluded 3 months ago. Isla pled guilty to 2 counts of child endangerment and was sentenced to 5 years in prison, with the possibility of parole in 3. She was also required to complete extensive psychological treatment and would have only supervised visitation with the boys if and when she was released. David had filed for divorce immediately after her sentencing. The proceedings were swift and uncontested. Isla's parental rights were terminated, and David was awarded full custody with me as the boy's legal guardian should anything happen to him. "Grandma," Tommy said, looking up from the puzzle, "can we go to the park after breakfast?" "Of course, sweetheart," I said, flipping a pancake. "We can take your bikes." It was these simple moments that meant everything now. Tommy asking normal 7-year-old questions, Jake giggling at his brother's jokes, both boys sleeping naturally through the night and waking up refreshed and energetic. Dr. Walsh had been right about children's resilience. The brain scans she'd taken last month showed remarkable improvement. The areas of decreased activity were returning to normal, and both boys were thriving in every measurable way. Tommy had caught up academically within weeks of starting therapy. His teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, had been amazed by his transformation. "It's like watching a different child," she'd told me during our last conference. "Whatever was affecting his concentration and memory before has completely resolved. He's one of my brightest students now." Jake, too, was flourishing. His preschool teacher noted that he was more engaged, more curious, and more social than he'd ever been. The quiet, compliant child who used to sit passively during activities had been replaced by an inquisitive little boy who asked endless questions and wanted to try everything. David had returned to work part-time, arranging his schedule so he could be home when the boys got out of school. We'd developed a routine that worked for all of us. The boys spent weekdays with me and weekends with David in his new apartment. It wasn't traditional, but it was stable and filled with love. "Mom," David said, setting down his newspaper, "I got a call from my lawyer yesterday. Isla's mother is requesting visitation rights." My blood ran cold. "What did you tell him?" "That she knew what Isla was doing and encouraged it. I have the text messages to prove it." David's voice was firm. "There's no way I'm exposing the boys to that woman." It had taken months for the full scope of the generational abuse to come to light. During Isla's psychological evaluation, it was revealed that she'd been medicated as a child by her own mother, who saw children as problems to be managed rather than people to be nurtured. "The cycle stops here," David said, echoing words he'd spoken many times over the past months. "My boys are going to grow up knowing they're loved for who they are, not medicated into who someone wants them to be." After breakfast, We loaded the boys' bikes into David's car and headed to Riverside Park. It was the same park where I'd taken David when he was little, where we'd fed ducks and played on the swings and built memories that lasted a lifetime. Watching Tommy and Jake race their bikes along the path, their laughter echoing across the water, I felt a profound sense of peace. These were the moments Isla's medication had stolen from them. The pure joy of childhood, unfiltered and authentic. "Look, Grandma," Jake called out, pedaling furiously to catch up with his brother. "I'm going super fast." "You sure are, buddy," I called back, my heart swelling with pride. David jogged alongside me as we followed the boys' bike parade. "I've been thinking," he said, "about selling the house." I wasn't surprised. David had been struggling with living in the place where so much trauma had occurred. "Where would you want to go?" "I was thinking maybe somewhere closer to you. The boys are so comfortable at your house, and honestly, I don't think I can stand to be in that kitchen where she used to." He trailed off, but I understood. Where she used to crush pills and mix them into innocent children's drinks. "There's a nice house for sale 3 blocks from me," I said. 4 bedrooms, big backyard. The boys could bike to my house whenever they wanted. David smiled, the first genuinely happy smile I'd seen from him in months. "That sounds perfect." That evening, after David had taken the boys home to his apartment, I sat in my living room with a cup of tea and thought about how dramatically our lives had changed. 6 months ago, I'd been a grandmother who saw her grandsons occasionally, always under Isla's watchful eye. Now I was an integral part of their daily lives, helping to raise them and heal from the trauma they'd endured. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was Miguel from the car wash. "Mrs. Ramona," he said, his voice warm with affection. "I was just thinking about those boys. How are they doing?" "They're wonderful, Miguel. Absolutely wonderful." "And your son?" "I know this has been hard on him too." I thought about David, about the guilt he'd carried and was slowly learning to release, about the man he'd become through this ordeal, stronger, more present, more protective of his children. "He's healing too," I said. "We all are." "Good," Miguel said simply. "Those babies deserved better. I'm glad they got it." After I hung up, I walked to my mantle where I kept family photos. There was a new one there, taken last week at Tommy's school play. He was dressed as a tree in the environmental awareness production, his face beaming with pride. Jake sat on David's lap in the audience, clapping enthusiastically for his big brother. It was a normal family moment, the kind Isla had stolen with her need for chemical control. But we'd reclaimed it. We'd fought for it and won. The next morning brought unexpected news. Sarah Collins called to tell me that Isla had been moved to a psychiatric facility within the prison system. Her behavior had become increasingly erratic, and she was undergoing intensive treatment. "I thought you should know," Sarah said, "because there's a possibility she might try to contact you or the boys as part of her therapy process. If she does, you're under no obligation to respond or allow contact." "She won't be contacting us," I said firmly. "David's made that very clear to her lawyer." "Good. The boys have made remarkable progress, Mrs. Patterson. Your decision to act when you did probably saved their lives." After I hung up, I thought about Isla locked away in a psychiatric facility, finally forced to confront the damage she'd done. I didn't feel sorry for her. I couldn't. But I did feel grateful that she was getting help, if only so she could never hurt another child the way she'd hurt mine. That afternoon, Tommy came home from school with a picture he'd drawn in art class. It showed 4 stick figures standing in front of a house with a big tree and a dog. "That's our family," he explained, pointing to each figure. "That's me, that's Jake, that's Daddy, and that's you, Grandma." "What about the dog?" I asked, smiling. "That's the dog we're going to get when Daddy buys the house near you," he said matter-of-factly. "Jake wants a golden retriever, but I think we should get a German shepherd." I looked at this picture, this representation of our reconstructed family, and felt overwhelmed with gratitude, not for what we'd been through, but for where we'd ended up. Stronger, closer, more honest with each other than we'd ever been before. "I think," I said, hugging Tommy close, "that we should let Daddy decide about the dog." Tommy giggled. Daddy always says yes to everything we want now. It was true. David had become almost permissive in his parenting, as if he was afraid any boundary might somehow echo Isla's control. Dr. Walsh was helping him find balance, teaching him the difference between healthy structure and harmful restriction. As I tucked the boys into bed that night, Jake looked up at me with his clear, bright eyes. "Grandma," he said sleepily, "I'm glad the sleepy medicine is gone." "Me too, sweetheart." "I like feeling like myself," he said, "even when I'm cranky or don't want to go to bed." I kissed his forehead, marveling at this 5-year-old's wisdom. "You should always feel like yourself, Jake. That's what makes you special." Tommy in the bed across the room mumbled his agreement. "Mama used to say we were too much trouble, but you and Daddy say we're just right." "You are just right," I said firmly. "Exactly as you are." As I turned off their light and closed their door, I reflected on how much we'd all learned. That love doesn't require medication or control. That children deserve to be children, with all the energy and curiosity and occasional defiance that entails. That sometimes protecting your family means making the hardest choices of your life. 6 months ago, I'd stood in Miguel's car wash, staring at evidence that would destroy my family as I knew it. Tonight, I was watching over 2 healthy, happy boys who were finally free to be themselves. We'd lost Isla, but we'd found each other. We'd lost the illusion of a perfect family, but we'd gained something much more valuable, the truth, and the chance to build something real from the pieces. In the end, that was worth everything. The boys were safe. David was healing. Our family was smaller now, but it was genuine in a way it had never been before. And for the first time in 3 years, everyone in our house was sleeping peacefully, naturally, without any chemical assistance at all. That, I realized as I settled into my own bed, was the sweetest victory of all. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below, and meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.